Marcus Chen stared at his reflection in his bathroom mirror, adjusting his navy blue tie one last time. At 42, he carried himself with quiet confidence, earned through years of building his tech company, digital innovations, from a small startup to a billion-dollar enterprise. His short-trimmed beard was starting to show hints of gray, but his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him since his college days. It was 5:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning in Boston. Marcus had learned long ago that early flights were the best for business travel: fewer delays, fewer crowds, and more time to prepare for important meetings. Today's flight to San Francisco was particularly crucial. His company was about to launch a new software platform that could revolutionize how small businesses handled their online security. As he grabbed his leather briefcase and carry-on bag, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. "Good morning, son. Have a safe flight. Don't forget to eat breakfast." Marcus smiled. Even after all these years of success, his mother still treated him like her little boy. He quickly replied with a heart emoji and headed to his waiting Uber. The drive to Logan International Airport was peaceful. Boston streets were still quiet, with only a few early morning workers and delivery trucks sharing the road. Marcus used this time to review his presentation one last time on his tablet. His driver, an elderly man named Joe, hummed along to soft jazz playing on the radio. "Big day ahead, sir?" Joe asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," Marcus replied with a warm smile. "Hopefully, it's the kind of day that changes things for the better." At the airport, Marcus moved through security with practiced ease. His TSA pre-check status meant he didn't have to remove his shoes or laptop, and within minutes, he was walking toward Gate B15. He stopped at a small cafe, ordering his usual morning fuel, a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin. The gate area was starting to fill up with other business travelers, most buried in their phones or laptops. Marcus noticed how they all seemed to fit a certain mold: suits, briefcases, tired eyes. Over the years, he had grown used to being one of the few black executives in these spaces, but it never stopped being noticeable. As he waited for boarding to begin, Marcus opened his email to find a message from his sister, Lisa. She had attached photos from his nephew's first basketball game. The 10-year-old boy was beaming in his new jersey, and Marcus made a mental note to call them later that evening. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 2847 to San Francisco, the gate agent announced over the intercom. Marcus gathered his belongings and joined the short line forming at the gate. He pulled up his boarding pass on his phone. Seat 2A, his preferred spot by the window. As he walked down the jet bridge, Marcus thought about how far he'd come. 20 years ago, he was a computer science student working part-time at a computer repair shop. Now, he was leading a company with over 500 employees. His parents had always taught him that success came with responsibility, not just to do well, but to do good. Stepping onto the plane, Marcus nodded politely to the flight attendants at the door. The first one, a young man named David, according to his name tag, smiled warmly and gestured toward the first-class cabin. The second attendant, an older woman with graying blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, barely glanced at him. Marcus stored his carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into his seat. The leather was cool and comfortable, and he immediately reached for the air vent above, adjusting it to his liking. Other first-class passengers filed in around him, a woman in a crisp business suit, an elderly gentleman reading a newspaper, a young tech entrepreneur he recognized from a recent conference. Looking out the window, Marcus watched the early morning sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. Ground crew members moved purposefully around the plane, their fluorescent vests glowing in the dawn light. He took a deep breath, enjoying these quiet moments before what promised to be a long day. Little did Marcus know that this routine business flight was about to become anything but ordinary. As he pulled out his tablet to review his presentation one final time, he had no idea that the next few hours would test not just his patience, but his principles, in ways he never expected. The flight had been in the air for about 20 minutes when Karen Walsh, the flight attendant with the gray blonde bun, began the first-class drink service. Marcus watched as she moved through the cabin, offering warm smiles and friendly chat to each passenger. He noticed how she spent extra time laughing at a joke from the elderly man in 1C and discussing wine choices with the businesswoman in 3B. When she reached Marcus's row, her entire demeanor changed. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. She didn't make eye contact as she spoke. What would you like to drink? Her voice was cold and sharp, nothing like the warm tone she had used with other passengers. Coffee, black, please. Marcus replied politely, used to these subtle changes in treatment. He had experienced similar situations throughout his career, but he never let them affect his professional demeanor. Karen returned with his coffee, but instead of placing it carefully on his tray table like she had done for others, she set it down roughly, causing some to splash onto Marcus's tablet. Without a word of apology, she moved on to the next row, where her friendly smile instantly returned. Marcus quietly wiped his tablet with a napkin, keeping his face neutral. A young woman sitting across the aisle had noticed the incident and gave him a sympathetic look. He gave her a small nod in return. 15 minutes later, Karen returned to the cabin, this time scrutinizing the passengers more closely. She stopped at Marcus's seat again. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass," she announced loudly, causing several passengers to look up from their activities. Of course, Marcus replied calmly, pulling up the digital boarding pass on his phone. This was the third time he had been asked to show it since boarding. Once at the gate, once when entering the plane, and now again. Karen studied the boarding pass with exaggerated care, holding the phone close to her face. "This section is for first-class passengers only," she stated, her voice carrying through the quiet cabin. "Yes, I'm aware," Marcus responded, keeping his voice steady. "As you can see, I'm in my assigned seat, 2A, a few rows back," someone whispered. "Isn't that Marcus Chen, the CEO of Digital Innovations?" But Karen either didn't hear or chose to ignore the comment. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, her voice getting louder. "These seats are very expensive. Are you sure you didn't get confused with economy class?" The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. The businessman reading his newspaper in the row ahead lowered it slowly, turning to watch the scene unfold. The young woman across the aisle had stopped pretending to work on her laptop and was now openly staring, her face showing disbelief at what she was witnessing. Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. "Ma'am, I'm a frequent flyer with your airline. Platinum status for the past 5 years. I'm also the CEO of Digital Innovations. This is my correct seat assignment." Karen's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, she became more aggressive. "Anyone can say they're a CEO. I need to see some ID and your previous boarding passes." At this point, David, the younger flight attendant who had greeted Marcus warmly at the door, appeared in the cabin. He had been in the galley but had overheard the commotion. His face showed concern as he assessed the situation. "Is there a problem here?" David asked, looking between Karen and Marcus. "This passenger needs to be moved to his correct section," Karen declared, crossing her arms. "I don't believe he belongs in first class." Marcus remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught him to stay composed, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his growing frustration. He could feel his heart beating faster, not from fear, but from the familiar weight of having to prove himself yet again. The young woman across the aisle had started recording the interaction on her phone, while other passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The quiet morning flight had suddenly become a stage for something much more troubling, and everyone knew it. David stepped closer, recognition flickering across his face. He had seen Marcus on this route before and knew exactly who he was, but before he could speak, Karen made a decision that would turn this incident into something much bigger than a simple seating dispute. Karen Walsh's next actions shocked everyone in the first-class cabin. She reached for Marcus's laptop bag, which was placed neatly under the seat in front of him. "If you won't move voluntarily, I'll have to move your belongings myself," she declared, her voice shaking with poorly contained anger. "Ma'am, do not touch my property," Marcus said firmly, his usual calm voice taking on a steel edge. Inside the bag was not only his laptop but also confidential company documents and contracts worth millions of dollars. David, the younger flight attendant, quickly stepped forward. "Karen, I know this passenger. Mr. Chen flies with us regularly." But Karen cut him off. "I've worked this route for 15 years, she snapped. "I know all our regular first-class passengers," she turned back to Marcus, "and I've never seen you before." The young woman across the aisle, who was still recording everything, spoke up. "This is ridiculous. I follow his company on LinkedIn. That's Marcus Chen. He was just featured in Business Weekly." Karen's face grew redder. She straightened her uniform jacket and spoke in a loud, theatrical voice that carried throughout the cabin. "Sir, you are causing a disturbance. If you don't return to your proper section immediately, I'll be forced to contact the captain and have you removed from this flight." Marcus remained seated, his expression composed but firm. "I will not move from my assigned seat," he stated clearly. "What you're doing is discriminatory and unprofessional. I suggest you check the passenger manifest again." Other passengers had begun to voice their support for Marcus. The elderly man in 1C turned around and said, "Young man, I saw you speak at last year's Tech Summit. Brilliant presentation on cybersecurity." A businesswoman in the third row held up her phone. "I literally just read an article about him in Forbes. This is absurd." Karen's hands were trembling now, but she wouldn't back down. In a move that would later be viewed thousands of times on social media, she reached for Marcus's coffee cup. "Since you're not supposed to be here, I'll have to remove this as well." As she grabbed the cup, her shaking hands caused the hot coffee to splash across Marcus's white shirt and suit jacket. Several passengers gasped. The dark liquid spread quickly across the expensive fabric, and Marcus stood up instinctively, the hot liquid burning against his skin. "That's assault," someone shouted from the back of the cabin. David rushed forward with napkins. "Karen, stop. This has gone too far. I'm calling the lead flight attendant." But Karen wasn't finished. In a desperate attempt to assert her authority, she reached for Marcus's tablet. "All unauthorized items need to bed." "Do not touch my property again," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Karen freeze. "I am formally requesting your employee number and the name of your supervisor. David, please bring the lead flight attendant and the air marshal if one is on board." The situation had drawn attention from the economy section now, with several passengers standing to see what was happening. Someone called out, "We've got it all on video, sir." The lead flight attendant, a tall woman named Sarah Martinez, arrived quickly. She took one look at the scene. Marcus standing with his coffee-stained shirt, Karen's trembling defiance, the crowd of recording passengers, and immediately took control. "Karen, go to the back galley now," she ordered. Then she turned to Marcus, her face professionally apologetic. "Mr. Chen, I deeply apologize for this incident. Please let us get you something to help clean your shirt, and I'll need to file an immediate report." Marcus nodded, maintaining his dignity despite the coffee stains spreading across his chest. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I'd appreciate a copy of that report, and I'll need medical attention for these burns when we land." The cabin remained silent as Karen walked stiffly to the back of the plane. David quickly brought a first aid kit and club soda for the stains, while the lead flight attendant began taking statements from nearby passengers. Marcus sat back down, his shirt soaked but his composure intact. He pulled out his phone and sent a brief email to his company's legal team, not seeking revenge, but ensuring the incident would be properly addressed. As he looked around the cabin, he saw something that gave him hope. Passengers of all backgrounds united in their support, many still recording, others offering their contact information as witnesses. What Karen hadn't realized was that her actions would lead to changes far beyond the single flight, changes that would affect the entire airline industry's approach to racial bias and customer service. Within 30 minutes of the coffee incident, the entire atmosphere on Flight 2847 had changed dramatically. Word had spread throughout the plane, and passengers from economy class were finding excuses to walk past first class, trying to catch a glimpse of the CEO who had handled such blatant discrimination with remarkable grace. Marcus sat in his coffee-stained shirt, typing quickly on his phone. The burns on his chest stung, but he focused on documenting every detail while it was fresh in his mind. Sarah Martinez, the lead flight attendant, had provided him with an ice pack wrapped in a cloth napkin to help with the burns. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said quietly, leaning down next to his seat. "The captain would like to speak with you after we land. He's also radioed ahead, and there will be medical personnel waiting at the gate in San Francisco." Marcus nodded, appreciating her professionalism. "Thank you. Could you tell me how many cameras are in the first-class cabin?" He already knew the answer but wanted it confirmed. "4, sir, and they capture audio as well." Sarah's expression showed she understood the importance of this information. "I've already marked the footage for preservation." The young woman across the aisle, who had recorded everything on her phone, leaned over. "Mr. Chen, I'm Amanda Torres, a software developer at Microsoft. I have the whole incident recorded, starting from when she first questioned your seat. I'm happy to send it to you." More passengers began offering their contact information as witnesses. The elderly man from 1C passed back his business card. The businesswoman in 3B walked up with a fresh shirt from her carry-on luggage. Her husband's spare that she always packed for long business trips. "It's not exactly your style," she said with a kind smile, "but it's better than sitting in wet clothes for the next 4 hours." Marcus accepted the shirt gratefully and went to the first-class bathroom to change. Looking in the mirror, he saw red marks forming on his chest where the hot coffee had soaked through his shirt. He took photos of the burns with his phone, then carefully put on the borrowed shirt. A simple blue button-down that was slightly too big but vastly more comfortable than his soaked clothing. When he returned to his seat, he found several emails waiting for him. His company's legal team had already responded, and his PR department was preparing for potential media coverage. But Marcus had a different plan forming in his mind. David, who had been attending to other passengers, returned with a fresh cup of coffee, this time in a covered travel mug. "I'm so sorry about earlier, Mr. Chen," he said softly. "I've worked with Karen for 3 months, and I've noticed patterns, but I've never seen her go this far." Marcus looked at the young flight attendant thoughtfully. "How's your training program here? Particularly regarding diversity and inclusion?" David hesitated before answering honestly. "It's basic. 1 day during initial training and a yearly online course that everyone clicks through as quickly as possible." Marcus pulled out his business card and handed it to David. "I may have an idea about that. Would you be willing to talk to HR about your experiences?" As the flight continued towards San Francisco, Marcus began drafting a proposal on his tablet. Instead of just filing a lawsuit, he saw an opportunity for real change. His company, Digital Innovations, had recently developed a virtual reality training program for corporate diversity and sensitivity training. It put users in the shoes of people facing discrimination, helping them understand the impact of their actions and biases. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into San Francisco. Marcus saved his draft and looked out the window at the scattered clouds below. Karen hadn't returned to the first-class cabin. He learned she was being kept in the back galley for the remainder of the flight. As the plane began its descent, passengers around Marcus were still talking about the incident, some sharing their own experiences with discrimination, others expressing their admiration for his composed response. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the praise or the viral videos that would surely surface. He was focused on turning this ugly incident into something positive, a chance to create lasting change in how airlines trained their staff. The plane banked gently toward San Francisco International Airport, and Marcus smiled slightly. This wasn't the business trip he had planned, but it might end up being even more important than his original purpose. Sometimes, he thought, the most significant changes come from the most unexpected moments. The scene at San Francisco International Airport's Gate C4 was unlike anything the ground crew had ever seen. Before Flight 2847 even reached the gate, 3 airline executives in dark suits were waiting at the jet bridge entrance. Behind them stood 2 paramedics with a first aid kit, and off to the side, a police officer waited quietly. As passengers began deplaning, many stopped to shake Marcus's hand or pat his shoulder supportively. The young woman who had recorded the incident, Amanda Torres, made sure to send in the video before leaving. "I've already got 3 messages from news stations asking to use it," she told them. Marcus walked off the plane last, his borrowed blue shirt a visible reminder of the incident. Sarah Martinez, the lead flight attendant, walked with him, carrying his coffee-stained clothing in a plastic bag. "The airline will cover the dry cleaning, Mr. Chen," she said, but they both knew this was about much more than a ruined shirt. The airline's vice president of customer relations, James Thompson, stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Chen, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for what happened today. We've already reviewed the initial report and some passenger videos. This is completely unacceptable." Marcus nodded, but gestured to the paramedics first. "Thank you, but let me get these burns checked out before we talk." The medical team quickly examined him, applying burn cream and documenting his injuries. The police officer also took a brief statement, though Marcus made it clear he wasn't interested in pressing criminal charges. Once the medical examination was complete, the airline executives led Marcus to their premium lounge, which had been cleared of other passengers. As they settled into the private conference room, Marcus noticed his phone buzzing constantly with notifications. The incident was already spreading across social media. "We'd like to offer you lifetime platinum status and unlimited first-class upgrades," Thompson began, but Marcus held up his hand. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said calmly, opening his tablet, "I don't want compensation. I want change. I've spent the last 4 hours developing a proposal." The executives exchanged surprised looks as Marcus continued. "My company, Digital Innovations, has developed a state-of-the-art VR training program for corporate diversity and inclusion. It doesn't just teach people what not to do, it helps them understand why their actions matter." He pulled up a presentation and turned his tablet around. "This isn't about punishing Karen Walsh. It's about preventing the next Karen Walsh from making the same mistakes." As Marcus walked them through his proposal, the executives' expressions changed from defensive to intrigued. The program would put employees through realistic scenarios, letting them experience situations from multiple perspectives. It included modules on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and proper escalation procedures. "We'll need to make some airline-specific modifications," Marcus explained, "but we could have this ready to roll out within 3 months. And I'm prepared to offer it at cost, no profit margin." Thompson leaned forward, genuinely interested. "This is not what we expected, Mr. Chen. Most people in your position would be talking to lawyers right now." "Oh, my lawyers will still be involved," Marcus smiled slightly, "but only to draw up the contract for this training program. I'd rather prevent future incidents than profit from this one." Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed with a news alert. The first viral video of the incident had already reached 1 million views. #CEO in first class was trending on Twitter, and several civil rights organizations had released statements. The airline's PR director, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. "Mr. Chen, would you be willing to do a joint press release about this training initiative? It would show we're taking concrete action, not just making empty apologies." Marcus agreed, but with one condition. Karen Walsh needs to be part of the pilot program, not fired. If she's willing to learn and change, she should have that chance. The meeting continued for another hour, working out details and timelines. By the time Marcus finally left the airport, he had missed his afternoon meetings, but something more important had been accomplished. As his Uber drove toward downtown San Francisco, Marcus's phone rang. It was his mother. "I saw the video," she said softly. "Are you okay, baby?" "I'm fine, Mom," he replied, looking out at the city skyline. "Actually, I'm better than fine. Sometimes bad moments lead to good changes." "That's my boy," she said proudly. "Always building bridges, even when others put up walls." 1 month after the infamous flight incident, Marcus Chen stood in a large training room at the airline's headquarters in Atlanta. The room was filled with VR headsets and 30 airline employees, including Karen Walsh, who sat quietly in the back row, looking nervous but determined. The viral video of the coffee incident had now been viewed over 50 million times. While many people had called for Karen's firing, Marcus's approach to the situation had earned praise from civil rights leaders and business experts alike. Rather than seeking revenge, he had pushed for education and change. "Today, you'll be the first group to experience our new training program," Marcus announced to the room. He had personally flown in for this pilot session, wanting to see the results firsthand. "This isn't about shame or blame. It's about understanding." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Marcus walked over to her. To everyone's surprise, he handed her the first VR headset himself. "Would you like to help demonstrate how this works?" he asked kindly. With slightly shaking hands, Karen accepted the headset. Over the past month, she had received hundreds of angry messages and even death threats. But Marcus's legal team had helped protect her privacy, and his insistence that she be given a chance at redemption had saved her job. The first scenario, Marcus explained as Karen put on the headset, puts you in the shoes of a successful business person who faces constant questioning about belonging in premium spaces. The room watched as Karen's expressions changed while going through the virtual experience. At one point, she reached up to wipe away a tear. The VR program wasn't just showing her what discrimination looked like, it was letting her feel what it felt like. After 15 minutes, Karen removed the headset. Her makeup was slightly smeared, but her eyes showed something new, understanding. I never realized, she said softly. In my mind, I was just doing my job, being thorough. But now I see how it felt from the other side. Marcus nodded encouragingly. That's exactly what this program is designed to do. It's not enough to tell people their actions are harmful, they need to understand why. Over the next 3 hours, all 30 employees went through different scenarios in the program. Some scenarios focused on racial bias, others on gender discrimination, age prejudice, or religious intolerance. Each situation was based on real incidents that had occurred on airlines. During the lunch break, Karen approached Marcus at the coffee station. The irony of meeting over coffee wasn't lost on either of them. Mr. Chen, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I've been wanting to apologize properly. Not because I had to, but because I truly understand now how wrong I was. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Karen, and said, Growth comes from our mistakes when we're willing to learn from them. You're here, you're learning, and that's what matters. By the end of the training day, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Employees who had started the day skeptical or defensive were now engaged in deep discussions about their own unconscious biases and how to address them. The airline's training director announced that based on the success of this pilot program, they would be rolling out the VR training to all 20,000 customer-facing employees over the next 6 months. Additionally, they would be sharing the program with other airlines through an industry initiative. As Marcus packed up his presentation materials, he received a text message from Amanda Torres, the Microsoft employee who had recorded the original incident. She had attached a link to a LinkedIn post about the training program that was going viral in corporate circles. You turned a coffee attack into a corporate revolution, she wrote. Amazing. Back in his hotel room that evening, Marcus called his mother as he always did after important days. How did it go? She asked. Remember how you always told me that education is more powerful than anger? Marcus replied, smiling. You were right. Today I watched the same flight attendant who discriminated against me become one of the strongest advocates for change. That's real revenge, his mother said wisely. Not hurting people who hurt you, but helping them become better people. Marcus looked out his hotel window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about how sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best changes. Tomorrow, he would head back to his regular CEO duties, but something more important had started here, a ripple effect that would touch thousands of lives. 6 months after the coffee incident, Marcus Chen stood on stage at the National Aviation Conference in Chicago. The audience was filled with executives from airlines around the world, all eager to hear about the diversity training program that had transformed one airline's culture and was now making headlines across the industry. But Marcus wasn't alone on stage. To everyone's surprise, Karen Walsh stood beside him, now serving as one of the program's most effective advocates. Her journey from being the face of discrimination to becoming a champion for change had caught the media's attention in a whole new way. 6 months ago, I was the villain in a viral video, Karen began, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. Today, I'm here to tell you how that moment of shame became the most important learning experience of my life. The large screen behind them showed statistics from the airline's implementation of the VR training program. Customer complaints about discrimination down by 75%. Employee satisfaction ratings up by 45%. Positive social media mentions increased by 300%. 4 other major airlines had already adopted the program. Marcus watched proudly as Karen shared her personal transformation story. She had gone from being a problem employee to leading training sessions, sharing her experience with new staff members, and helping them understand their own hidden biases. In the audience, Amanda Torres, the Microsoft employee who had recorded the original incident, sat taking notes. Her company was now in talks with Digital Innovations to adapt the training program for the tech industry. What had started as an airline problem was spreading to other sectors. After the presentation, during the Q&A session, a reporter raised his hand. Mr. Chen, you could have sued the airline for millions. Instead, you chose to create this program. Why? Marcus stepped forward to the microphone. Because lawsuits end with punishment, but education ends with understanding. The goal was never to destroy careers, but to transform them. During the conference lunch break, Karen and Marcus sat together, drinking coffee, something that had become their personal tradition at every training event. "My daughter started college this semester," Karen shared. She told her sociology class about how her mom learned to face her own biases. "Can you believe I'm a case study in her textbook?" Marcus smiled. "Sometimes our worst moments become our best teachers." He showed Karen his phone, displaying an email from his mother. She had forwarded him a link to a news story about a small regional airline that had just adopted their training program. That afternoon, they met with executives from international airlines interested in implementing the program globally. The VR scenarios were being translated into 12 languages, with cultural adaptations for different regions. Sarah Martinez, the lead flight attendant from the original flight who had handled the situation professionally, had been promoted to director of in-flight training. She joined them for the international presentation, sharing how the program had changed their entire training approach. "We don't just teach policies anymore," Sarah explained to the international audience. "We teach empathy, understanding, and real human connection." After the conference, Marcus received an unexpected call. A major civil rights organization wanted to honor him with their annual Corporate Responsibility Award. But Marcus had a different idea. "Instead of giving me an award," he suggested, "let's create a scholarship program. We can help minority students enter the aviation industry. That's how we create lasting change, by opening doors for the next generation." That evening, as Marcus packed up his presentation materials, he found a handwritten note on his podium. It was from a young flight attendant who had attended the conference. "My grandmother was one of the first black flight attendants in the 1960s. She faced discrimination every day but kept working to make things better. Today, watching you and Karen on stage together, I finally saw the change she always dreamed about. Thank you for showing us that transformation is possible." Marcus carefully folded the note and put it in his wallet. Later that night, during his regular call with his mother, he read it to her. "You see, baby," his mother said softly, "sometimes the coffee spills become stepping stones." As Marcus looked out his hotel window at the Chicago skyline, he thought about how one horrible moment had sparked a movement of change. The incident that could have ended careers had instead transformed them. The video that could have divided people had united them in purpose. The real revenge, he realized, wasn't in punishment, it was in progress. 1 year to the day after the infamous coffee incident, Marcus Chen found himself back on the same flight route from Boston to San Francisco. This time, however, was different. Flight 2847 had been specially designated as the Unity Flight to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the training program that had changed the airline industry. The first-class cabin was full of familiar faces. Amanda Torres, whose viral video had sparked the initial outrage, sat in 3A. Sarah Martinez, now a senior executive in charge of corporate training, occupied 2B, and in the front row, wearing her flight attendant uniform with a new golden pin that read "Change Ambassador," was Karen Walsh. As passengers boarded, many recognized Marcus and Karen from news stories and documentaries. Some even asked to take photos with them, the CEO, and the flight attendant whose conflict had led to unexpected positive change. "Coffee, Mr. Chen?" Karen asked with a genuine smile, carefully placing the cup on his tray table. They both chuckled at the moment, now able to find humor in what had once been a source of pain. The flight captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're on a historic flight today. 1 year ago, an incident on this very route sparked a transformation in our industry. Today, we celebrate how far we've come." The results of that transformation were impressive. Over 100,000 airline employees worldwide had completed the VR training program. Discrimination complaints across participating airlines had dropped by 82%. The program had expanded beyond airlines to hotels, restaurants, and retail chains. A documentary about the incident and its aftermath had won several awards. Marcus and Karen had been invited to speak at over 50 corporate events. During the flight, Marcus opened his laptop to review the latest initiative, a college scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. The fund, started with the money the airline had originally offered him as compensation, had already helped 30 students begin their journey in the industry. Karen sat down in the empty seat next to him during her break. "My grandson started kindergarten last week," she said, showing Marcus a photo on her phone. His class had a discussion about treating everyone with kindness. He raised his hand and said, "My grandma teaches people about that." Her eyes welled with tears of pride. Midway through the flight, Sarah Martinez organized a small ceremony in the first-class cabin. The airline was presenting its 100,000th VR training completion certificate. The recipient was a new flight attendant who had been inspired to join the airline specifically because of their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Sometimes, Marcus addressed the cabin, "Our worst moments become the foundation for our best changes." 1 year ago, this flight witnessed discrimination. Today, it carries the ambassadors of transformation. Amanda Torres, who had since become a diversity consultant alongside her tech career, shared how the video she recorded had been viewed over 200 million times. But more important than the views, she said, are the changes those views inspired. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Marcus received an email from his mother. She had attached a photo of his childhood bedroom wall where he had once pinned a toy pilot's wings. "You didn't become a pilot," she wrote, "but you helped change the sky for everyone who flies." After landing, the entire flight crew gathered for a photo. Karen stood next to Marcus, both holding cups of coffee, a symbol that had transformed from one of conflict to one of reconciliation. "You know what's funny?" Karen said as they walked through the terminal. "I almost called in sick that day a year ago. I was having a bad morning and didn't want to work. And I almost took a later flight," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand it at the time." That evening, at a small celebration dinner, Marcus raised his coffee cup in a toast. To bad moments that lead to good changes, to conflicts that create understanding, and to the power of choosing education over anger. As he looked around the table at the faces of those who had been part of this journey, Karen, Sarah, Amanda, and others, Marcus remembered something his father had told him long ago. True success isn't just about climbing higher. It's about building elevators for others to rise too. The coffee stains on his shirt from that day had long since been washed away, but the mark that incident left on the world would remain, not as a scar, but as a symbol of how transformation begins with understanding, and how sometimes the greatest revenge is showing others a better way forward.